"You don't belong here," my daughter said, "so I bought the house she lived in." Meredith stepped hesitantly across the gleaming tile floor of Ava's new townhome, the polished surface reflecting the bright morning light streaming through the oversized windows. Her well-worn, sensible shoes scraped softly, a subtle but distinct sound among the quiet murmurs of Ava's friends gathered in the living room. She tightened her grip on the strap of her faded blue cardigan, the one she'd owned for years and still wore with quiet pride. Though the yarns were thinning and a little frayed at the cuffs, it was a simple thread connecting her to who she was, steady, dependable, and, as she often reminded herself, someone who'd worked hard her entire life, even if she didn't have the trappings of wealth. Her heart lurched when, as she turned to set down the small gift bag she'd carried, a homemade apple pie wrapped in a checkered cloth. Her elbow caught a crystal vase perched precariously on the edge of a side table. The vase wobbled, teetered, then crashed to the floor. The blossoms inside scattered like pale confetti, a spray of roses rolling across the tile. Meredith's cheeks burned hot, and heads turned sharply. Ava's friends paused mid-conversation, their eyes flitting from Meredith to the shattered remains. "I'm so sorry," Meredith said softly, bending to gather the blooms. The cold petals slipped through her fingers. The sharp scent of crushed roses filled the air. "I didn't mean to." Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she placed the flowers on the floor, embarrassed not just by the accident, but by the sudden sharp awareness of how out of place she felt. Trying not to draw more attention, Meredith's gaze drifted to the kitchen counter where a small stack of mail sat, unsigned and slightly overlooked. Among the envelopes, a folded letter caught her eye. It was from a property management company, the kind of official correspondence she had rarely encountered. The letter was addressed to Ava, her name circled neatly in bright orange highlighter. Meredith's fingers brushed the edge of the paper. Something about the message whispered importance, an understated clue amid the elegant clutter. Ava, standing nearby in a polished outfit that shimmered under the natural light, smiled politely but didn't offer help. Her friends exchanged sidelong glances, subtle but unmistakable. Meredith felt the warmth of flush rise again as she finished tidying the scattered roses, realizing this visit was already marking her as the outsider. The vase was just the beginning. She stood up, smoothing the front of her cardigan, ready to face whatever came next. But that letter, half hidden and yet so prominent, planted a small seed of curiosity amid the discomfort. Somewhere beneath the surface of this awkward brunch, something was simmering, something that might just change everything. Meredith settled onto the plush designer couch, its smooth leather cool against her cardigan-clad back, but the luxury felt alien, like wearing a dress a size too small. As she tried to catch the conversation, laughter bubbled around her, but a sharp, unmistakable undertone lurked beneath it. Brittany, Ava's closest friend, eyed Meredith with a smirk and leaned in just loud enough for others to hear. "That cardigan looks like it's from a thrift shop," she said with a teasing tone, drawing a ripple of chuckles from the group. Meredith forced a smile, the edges trembling. Her hands clenched briefly at her sides under the weight of those words. Ava bit her lip, her eyes darting away, and for a flicker, Meredith glimpsed the conflict flicker there. A hesitation, a flicker of regret almost hidden behind the polite mask. When Meredith moved to sit closer, Ava gently placed a hand on her arm. "Mom, maybe you'd be more comfortable in the breakfast nook," she whispered, voice soft but firm. "The guests usually stay in the living room." "Mom." That word, a fragile lifeline, felt heavier with the underlying message. The carefully polite exile stung deeper than any outright insult. Meredith nodded, rising with a careful smile, feeling the group's eyes travel with her as she retreated to the smaller space. The hum of polite chatter resumed, but now carried a different edge. As if Meredith was a performer watching from the wings, she sipped her mimosa slowly, the bubbles rising, tickling her throat while her mind replayed Brittany's words. "I just wish Mom would fit in here," Ava murmured quietly to Brittany, their heads close together. Meredith caught only the faintest syllables, but it was enough. Her stomach clenched, a sharp contrast to the festive clinking of glasses. Outside, the sun shone bright, but inside, Meredith felt like a shadow at the periphery of a tightly woven tapestry. The conversation soon turned to the upcoming HOA meeting. Friday night, Ava's big chance to finally own the home she'd been leasing. The details were precise. The meeting followed strict procedures, including bid submissions and landlord approval. Ava's voice was steady, her excitement palpable to everyone but Meredith, who sat quietly, her mind swirling with doubt and an ache of separation. For a moment, Meredith closed her eyes, taking a slow breath. The chic apartment, the polished smiles, the whispered comments, they were not her world. But beneath the cool veneer, an ember of resolve sparked. If fitting in wasn't possible, maybe belonging had to be claimed another way. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. The days after the brunch slipped by with an awkward heaviness. Meredith dialed Ava's number again and again, her voice soft when she left messages, inviting, coaxing for a moment together that never came. Each unanswered call sunk deeper into her chest. One afternoon, she dusted the kitchen counter, then smiled as she pulled her apron tighter, and baked a batch of Ava's favorite chocolate chip cookies, cradling the warm pan like a fragile hope. She carefully wrapped the cookies in wax paper, tied the bundle with a pale blue ribbon, and set them on the doorstep of Ava's townhome, ringing the bell with a quiet knock. Later, as twilight settled, Meredith wandered past the building. Her breath caught when she spotted the sealed package lying untouched in the outdoor trash bin. The ribbon barely clung to the paper. A few crumbs scattered on the wet concrete. The sight stung worse than words. The message was clear. Her offering was not welcome, and the distance between her and Ava had grown wider than she thought possible. A wave of loneliness pressed down on Meredith as she stepped back into her small apartment basement. She turned on the radio, hoping for a distraction, but the static seemed to fill every corner with silence. Doubt crept in, whispering that maybe Ava truly wished to shut her out. Maybe all those years, the sacrifices she'd made, and the modest home she'd built were never enough. As the weekend approached, Meredith toyed with the idea of skipping the big HOA meeting. It wasn't her world, and attending might just remind everyone of the division between them. Yet a flicker of determination sparked when she checked the townhome's community website out of habit. A new post stood out. The landlord had posted an official notice of the house being offered for open sale at the upcoming HOA meeting. The surprising detail was the open sale wording. Anyone present at the meeting could place a bid, regardless of prior application. Scrolling further, Meredith found a comment from a neighbor who cautioned, "Watch out for fast cash offers. They usually take precedence around here. It's tough if you don't have the backing." The phrase hummed in Meredith's mind like a challenge. She pictured Ava's confident smile, the circle of friends celebrating what they thought was a done deal. And she wondered if there was, after all, a crack in the seemingly solid wall of exclusion. That night, Meredith sat by her kitchen window, tracing the worn edges of her blue cardigan. It was familiar, comfortable, a reminder that she wasn't someone who gave up easily. Maybe the world Ava wanted her to fit into wasn't ready for her, but maybe she didn't need to fit in at all. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to claim a place on her own terms. The idea hummed quietly through the room, a faint light in the dark. She caught a deep breath, steeling herself. The coming Friday was more than a date. It was a crossroads. And Meredith, against the growing weight of humiliation and doubt, found her heart leaning toward hope. Rain tapped steadily against the glass as Meredith stood outside Ava's front door, the sharp chill soaking through the thin fabric of her blue cardigan until it clung heavy to her arms and shoulders. Each drop weighed like a tiny reminder of everything she felt slipping away. Across the street, the sleek townhomes gleamed, freshly washed by the storm. Their gleaming lines and manicured shrubs, a stark contrast to her worn shoes and the faded knit she still refused to give up. Through the raindrop-flecked window, Meredith saw Ava inside, laughing with her friends, the steam of champagne flutes catching the soft light. One of them waved a thick envelope in the air, the edges crisp and official. Avery's friends cheered quietly, but Meredith's fingers trembled as they wrapped around the frayed hem of her sleeve. She reached inside her purse, fingers brushing worn receipts and a battered wallet. The empty spaces where she once kept confidence made her heart pound unevenly. This wasn't a game she could easily win. Not with the stacks of pristine paperwork and fat pre-approval letters piled up on the table inside. Then, as the shadows deepened, Meredith's gaze caught a weathered piece of paper tucked beneath the stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter from that first brunch she had attended. A letter from the property management company, with Ava's name circled and notes scribbled along the margins. She pulled the letter from memory. The sale had one crucial clause, a policy tucked tightly in the HOA's fine print. Any buyer physically present at the upcoming meeting could bid on the property, regardless of previous applications or approvals. That single legal loophole sang to her like a lifeline through the storm. Rain slicked down her cheeks, or was it tears? The line blurred as Meredith steadied her breath, pressing her palm flat against the cold glass. She imagined herself standing in that meeting room, the weight of those friends' judgment falling away, replaced by something else, possibility, maybe even quiet justice. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper inside, a small thread of hope weaving through the fabric of all her fears. It had seemed impossible moments ago, but that one technicality carved a doorway wide enough for her to step through. The storm rumbled again, distant but insistent. Meredith straightened slowly, the soaked blue cardigan now a badge of endurance rather than shame. If she could claim her place, not by changing who she was, but by knowing exactly where to stand, maybe this was her chance to rewrite the story. There in the relentless rain, Meredith breathed deep. Tomorrow would bring the meeting, the reckoning, and with it an opportunity no one saw coming. When dignity finally speaks, who tends to listen in your world? Meredith pushed open the heavy glass doors of the credit union with a quiet resolve she wasn't sure she'd felt before. The familiar scent of polished wood and freshly printed statements surrounded her, a comforting reminder of decades spent banking here. The same place where she'd opened Ava's savings account as a toddler, where every small deposit had been a promise for the future. Today, she wasn't here for deposits or withdrawals, but for an opportunity. Donna, balancing her glasses on the tip of her nose, looked up from her desk with a warm smile that flickered with recognition and surprise. Meredith? It's been a while. What brings you in today? Her voice was gentle, but her eyes searched as if weighing the current in the air. Taking a breath, Meredith laid out her plan succinctly. Donna, I learned the house Ava's been leasing is going up for a sale at the HOA meeting next week. There's a clause. It allows any buyer attending in person to bid, even without pre-approval. I want to try. Donna's expression softened as recognition dawned. I remember you mentioning Ava's move. That's tough, Meredith. But there is something that might help. A home buying program for long-standing members. It doesn't require pre-application, but does require showing up in person before the deadline. And your paperwork has to be spot on. Meredith's heart tightened. I'll be right there. Donna fished through some files and handed over a brochure outlining the program's requirements. Attendance at the meeting scheduled for next Friday, proof of steady income over the past year, and a certified letter of intent. It also noted a crucial deadline, a submission window that closed exactly 1 hour before the meeting's start. There's no wiggle room, Donna warned. Miss any of these, and you lose your chance. Meredith nodded. The stakes crystal clear. I understand. Missing this would mean Ava likely ends up buying the place herself, or worse, someone else with deeper pockets. Donna's eyes flickered briefly with a hint of sympathy. No longer just seeing a distant customer, but a woman navigating a delicate family fracture. You'll need to prepare everything meticulously. This isn't just about money. It's about showing you're serious and capable. Meredith's thoughts circled the risks. If she failed, it might deepen the rift with Ava. Friends and neighbors might question how she got involved, or worse, accuse her of undermining her daughter. Yet, The thought of letting the chance slip was unbearable. Before leaving, she paused by the small sign-in desk and claimed a copy of the HOA meeting agenda. Among prepared speech notes and formal motions, she found it listed: Item 5, Open Sale of Unit 7B, Bids from Attending Buyers Accepted per HOA Clause 4.3. That clause, so technical on paper, now pulsed with real possibility. Meredith folded the paper carefully, the edges crisp against her fingertips. A roadmap to the moment where perseverance might turn humiliation into quiet justice. Outside, the afternoon sun dipped low, streaking the sky with pinks and oranges. Meredith pulled her cardigan tighter, the weight of what lay ahead settling firm. The meeting would come fast, the deadline unforgiving, and behind it all, Ava's world hung in uncertain balance. But Meredith was ready to stand in it fully, prepared to claim what belonged not just to the property, but to her dignity. The community center buzzed softly with the low hum of anxious conversations and shuffling papers as Meredith arrived, her blue cardigan a steady contrast against the polished surroundings. She moved quietly to the back row, selecting a seat near the exit, her fingers clutching the envelope holding her certified check and the copies of the HOA bylaws she'd studied so intently. The familiar weight in her purse was a cushion for nerves that churned beneath her calm exterior. At the front, the HOA chair, a tall man named Mr. Carlyle with a reputation for strict fairness, called the meeting to order. The agenda rolled out steadily, budget reviews, landscaping plans, until finally the moment arrived. Item 5, Mr. Carlyle announced, the open sale of Unit 7B, currently leased by Miss Ava Bennett. He glanced over the room. Bids will be accepted from any attendees meeting the Clause 4.3 requirement for in-person submission. Ava, radiant and self-assured, stood confidently by the microphone. Her appraisal pre-approval letter dangled from a slender finger. The room's eyes twined between the young woman and Meredith at the back. Ava's voice was clear as she made her offer, one that reflected months of saving and hope. Before the gavel could strike, Meredith rose, steady but unmistakably determined. The room's murmur stilled instantly. She stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. I'd like to submit my offer. She laid the certified check on the table, fresh and unblemished, then laid out the documents, including the HOA's clause outlining the open attendance buying right, dated and signed by the board last year. Mr. Carlyle leaned in, scanning the papers with a meticulous eye. For a moment, silence stretched. The faces around the room flickered with surprise, skepticism, then recognition. Ava's jaw slackened, her confident posture wavering as the room processed a quiet upheaval. Meredith's name, once a quiet presence whispered by some, now carried weight across the polished wood desks. Mr. Carlyle looked up, meeting Meredith's steady gaze. The documentation is in order and complies fully with our governing rules, he said, voice firm and measured. He banged the gavel lightly. The property is hereby sold to Miss Meredith Harper. Whispers erupted, some incredulous, others begrudgingly respectful. Ava resisted the shock, her eyes flicking toward her mother, searching for an answer in her quiet composure. Brittany's smirk vanished, replaced by an uncertain glance and a tentative nod of acknowledgement. The atmosphere shifted, subtle but undeniable. Meredith returned to her seat, the blue of her cardigan now a banner. A quiet testament to endurance and rightful claim. The room had witnessed more than a transaction. They had witnessed the turning of tides. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. The room was thick with quiet murmurs as the HOA chair, Mr. Carlyle, tapped the gavel to announce the final sale. The papers on the desk gleamed under the overhead lights. The certified check Meredith had placed before the board, accompanied by the crisp, irrefutable documentation citing Clause 4.3. As the transaction became official, a wave of shocked whispers rippled through the crowd, eyes darting between Meredith, seated with quiet dignity, and Ava. Struggling to mask her disbelief, Ava's expression flickered, from stunned silence to a pale flush of shame, her confident posture slackening. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The reality sank in. Meredith, once sidelined and looked past, now held the deed to the very home Ava had hoped to call her own. The tight circle of friends who had gathered earlier looked on with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. Brittany, who had been the sharpest thorn in Meredith's side, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact before taking a hesitant step forward. "Meredith," she said, voice unsteady, I was wrong to judge you." It wasn't a grand apology, but carried an earnest weight that quieted the room further. Mr. Carlyle, unflinching in his role as arbiter, reviewed the sale documents once more, his voice steady. "All paperwork meets the requirements. Ms. Harper is the rightful owner by order of this board and the governing rules." He glanced at Ava, who nodded slowly, her pride bruised, but her gaze softening toward her mother's calm composure. Meredith rose, the blue of her cardigan catching the light, a silent banner of resilience and grace. She faced Ava, the mother-daughter divide suddenly feeling less chasm and more bridge. "If you'd like," Meredith began gently, "I'd be happy to have you stay on as a tenant. This house is ours now, both of ours. It doesn't have to change who we are, just how we live." Ava's lips quivered as she searched her mother's face, finding only kindness and unwavering strength. Attention in the room began to dissolve as neighbors and friends nodded in approval, some offering quiet congratulations. The community's gaze shifted, not just seeing Meredith as the outsider anymore, but as a woman who had taken control of her dignity and her future with quiet courage. The moment marked more than a property transfer. It was a reckoning, a reshaping of relationships, and for Meredith, a meaningful reclaiming of identity. She held herself with newfound pride. The whispered judgments gave way to respect grounded in undeniable truth. Outside the meeting room, the early evening light cast long shadows, but inside, a new chapter was being written, one where perseverance, fairness, and empathy prevailed. When dignity finally speaks, who tends to listen in your world? The soft light of morning filtered through the curtains as Meredith stood on the porch of the townhome she now owned. The sky stretched wide and calm, the neighborhood waking slowly with the rhythmic hum of distant lawnmowers and the satisfying scrape of a broom on pavement. Her fingers brushed the delicate petals of the once wilted roses, now freshly pruned, and stood upright in their familiar vase by the door. The scent was faint, but sweet, like hope renewed. Beside her, Ava adjusted the faded blue cardigan Meredith had worn through so much of this journey. It had become more than just a piece of clothing. It was a quiet emblem, a reminder that strength often came wrapped in gentle resilience, not flash or bravado. Ava smiled softly, the edges touched with apology and gratitude, her guard slowly lowering. They exchanged a glance that spoke of healing waiting to bloom. Meredith's voice was steady but worn. "You know, belonging isn't about fitting into a mold someone else shapes. It's about knowing your worth and standing tall even when others don't see it." Ava nodded thoughtfully, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think I'm starting to understand. It's not where we live, but how we live that counts." The door opened, and neighbors wandered past, nodding or waving in friendly acknowledgement. The once fractured community now looked at Meredith with new eyes, eyes that saw perseverance and dignity instead of outsider status. The neighborhood had quietly shifted around her, embracing not just a homeowner, but a woman whose kindness and courage had quietly rewritten the story. Inside, the kitchen table was cleared for the first time in weeks, ready for the brunch they would host together. The checkered cloth Meredith had used during her first nervous steps into this world now lay folded neatly, a symbol of threads mended and lives intertwined. Meredith reached toward the window, her fingers lingering on the cool glass as the sunrise painted the sky in soft golds and warm pinks. The roses outside swayed gently, bright and resilient, echoing the journey she and Ava had traveled together. For Meredith, this was more than a house. It was a home reclaimed, a family rewoven, and a future unknotted from past judgments. Here, she thought, belonging was finally real. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.